like to revisit something I spoke of on my channel about maybe 5, 6 years ago, maybe even longer, about the significance of Rochdale. It's like, I changed my opinion on a lot of things once I understood like Rochdale's mysteries. It changed the way I thought about authority forever. And it took me a long time to accept it. Much in the same way as it took me a very long time to accept the doctors when they were telling me, you're not well. I'm like, I'm just the same as I've always been. I'm not sick. No, you're sick. No, I'm fine. I'm just the way that I've always been. And the truth was, I'd always been sick. And now I get it. And now I understand. And now I understand what's relevant and what isn't. So that's just, that's part of my thing, is that sometimes it takes me a long time to learn something when it's going to require a shift. It's going to require a great big change in my views. It's going to make it so I have to reevaluate everything that I know, or everything I thought I knew. It's happened to me a few times in the past where I've had to completely reevaluate my position, and the conclusion I always come to is that I am equally to blame for my failures and downfalls as anyone else is, and I can't solely blame somebody else for my problems, because I could have always done better. And when you're up against institutions, the trick is not to take things personally, to understand that someone's in good conscience just trying to do the job, though in the way that they've been instructed, in the way that they've been trained. So it's a matter of, to start to hate on the government, to start to hate on, say, my own one, the NHS. It's like, once upon a time, there's the Scientologists, they're on our thing too. They're a crazy, horrible sect, but the way that they recruit is really, let's say, important, or even genius. They would wire me up to a lie detector machine, the same machine, and they'd say, we're gonna now look for engrams, and they'd start saying things, and your reaction as to the way that it's involuntary, as to get those needles moving, get your heart racing, get your boom, 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 boom. So they'll start saying things to you. They'll start just single words, sentences, and seeing how you react. See if it makes your blood pressure rise and your heart beat faster. And in a way, they can actually find subconscious problems. They actually use it in the right way. They think all things are cold, but this is like the sales pitch. You probably do well to go and have the sales pitch to find out what's bugging you. And that actually be useful as hell. But they use it to indoctrinate, to then give you a different version of the world. And that be nonsense. But the actual, let's find an engram, that's real. If you were to wire me to one of them machines and say the National Health Service, it would go boom, 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 boom. And as I've explained it in previous videos, they've tried to help me, but there's a version of events I can say as to where the doctors have destroyed my career and took away my livelihood. But it's like, but they didn't mean to do that. You just didn't accept what they had to say, and they couldn't prove it to you. They couldn't prove to me that they were right, because I just felt the same as I'd always felt. It took me years. It took for them to develop technologies that weren't available back when they were trying to help me. It took for them technologies to come along for them to be able to prove it, where I've gone, right, okay, maybe I was wrong all along, but so were you. But now you know you were wrong. saying my heart nurse is great. She's like, you probably did the right thing ignoring us all them years ago, because our methods of detection to work out what was wrong with you might have meant you having to undergo surgery for us to find out. Somebody would have had to have looked at my heart with a bare eye. Which, you know, is a bit of a big job. But that's the thing about, like, home truths. Often very difficult to accept. Because you've lived in some regards, you've lived a lie. And it's hard to accept that. Especially if you're someone who considers yourself to be intelligent or smart, it's a big hit. I had once a relationship that was based on sympathy, and I was deceived, and it was one of the worst experiences of my life when it came to an end, when the deception eventually, you know, evaporated. I was incredibly angry at myself, and it took me years to get over it. It took me years to process it. It was a betrayal, but it was also, yeah, but how did you fall for such a ruse? And it'd be a matter of, because of sympathy. Sympathy. So it's like, I learned a terrible lesson as to where it's like, once you've lost that bleeding heart, when it's that bleeding heart of sympathy sees you conned, tricked, betrayed, it then becomes a matter of, well, whose fault was that? And it'd be a matter of, well, it was my fault. I allowed myself to be deceived. Because when you feel sympathy for a cause, you'll likely believe anything that you're told by the person you feel, or the people you feel sympathy towards. It sort of clouds your judgment. Sympathy is not your friend, although sympathy in certain situations is absolutely, completely necessary. Dealing with the sick, dealing with children is absolutely necessary. But when adults are seeking sympathy for things that they've done to themselves, that's a waste of good energy, if you like. It will tear you up and break your heart when you're betrayed, when you were tricked. It's like, there's some things I've invented that were just jokes. When, you know, Bitcoin are a thing, I'm like, we should invent a new one called Dick Coin, because everyone loves Dick. Or a Simp Coin. It's like, instead of, oh, I feel so bad, why not send somebody some Simp Coin and, you know, send them some money. Simp Coin, send them some Simp Coin, express your sympathy. Don't make your heart bleed. Send them a few Simp Coin. If sympathy wasn't a commodity with a value, why would so many people seek it? Why? How many people are out in the world now seeking sympathy for things they've done to themselves through stupidity and naivety, and they themselves being tricked by sympathy? Some of the most harrowing tales you could tell are of good people with good hearts who find themselves in relationships with heroin addicts. And there's a lot round here. Oh, he's such a good lad and he suffers so much. And that's a performance he puts on with you, because if you feel sorry for him, she can just get whatever they want from you. So if your relationships are based on sympathy, if your causes are based on sympathy, it's like you stand to be used. You stand to be used. Because people who outwardly seek sympathy could have always done more to help themselves. And they're really like mourning their own souls. Unless the children, obviously. Injured children and sick people yeah, it's actually the right thing to feel a little bit sorry for him, to feel it. You can't not feel it. But it's like, once you've had that mechanism disrupted, so suddenly you start to, hey, hang on a minute. It becomes like a cynical set of triggers. You know, the heart no longer bleeds in the chest. The mind starts to ask questions instead. And I hate to say it, but it's like that's the beginning of wisdom. And wisdom is probably the state that's available when the bleeding heart stops bleeding. So I had this sort of almost a sympathy bypass a good few years ago, and once I'd had the sympathy bypassed, I suddenly had the ability to help people, talk to them, and actually ask them questions and be skeptical of what they have to say, and actually be able to address the topic of, you know, the reason why your heart's broken so badly is because somebody drained it, somebody emptied it of all your love and took it all for granted and all your sympathy, and you've been stupefied by your sympathy. And that sympathetic, gentle, kind heart, in some regards, be the best thing that you've got to give, and it was taken from you. That might be the heart of hearts. That might be, yeah, the greatest gift you could have ever given anyone was your care, and they stole it. And once it's stolen, there ain't no getting it back. All there is making the same mistake again. It's like it can become like a disease that gets passed on. It's malignant. People speak of like malignant narcissism. It's like, do you know how narcissism is malignant? How you can catch it? When someone breaks your heart and steals your sympathy. That's how it's malignant. One then becomes skeptical of the other and also learns a new set of tricks. It's a social disease. I refer to it, or understand it, as the biblical sickness of the soul, to have one's heart broken and sympathy stolen. The sickness unto death, as it's been called by Kierkegaard. The sickness unto death is to have one's heart broken out of sympathy. You're a clever fellow, weren't you, that Soren Kierkegaard? To say he was kicking around a couple of 100 years ago, he had a good command of the language and knew what it was to hurt, knew what it was to be in pain. He worked it out years before, you know, other guys have come along and added to the work. But that's something today. I was at that meeting and there was a chap who spoke, I think he was called Craig Murray. And he was a bleeding heart. Fine man. But he was one of these who was sympathetic. And he was deeply sympathetic to the cause of the Palestinians. It was fine. And over the years, I've spent a lot of time analysing all sides of the conflict. I say I started sympathetic, and then once my sympathy had been torn out of my chest, once suddenly it becomes inappropriate. So I have to readdress everything anew. And I was listening to this guy today, and he was speaking from a place of sympathy about, he was apparently dismissed from the Labour Party for like caring a little bit too much, the way that it was put, about the situation Palestine-Israel. He was basically, it appears that the leadership of the Labour Party at the time found him rather tiresome and troublesome. Because he's like, what about the human rights of these people? What about this? What about that? And it's like, he like wrote off the Israelis as just flat out evil And then he dropped a name. He mentioned Melanie Phillips, who's a journalist, and she's very much on the side of Israel. And he referred to her as being insane. It was the only time during that meeting today where I felt like saying something. And he just wrote off someone who's very thoughtful, but from the other side, with a different point of view, no less valid. And the best he could do was to say, well, she's insane. And I was desperate to stick my hand in the air and say, is that the best you've got? Is that all you can do? Is so other the opposition make a valid objection, but don't go throwing around that someone's just flat out insane. It's not enough. That's just a throwaway thing. And it's like if Melanie Phillips was to talk to this Murray chap and say, oh well, forget him, he's insane. How dismissive would that be, and how offended might that guy be that you're questioning my sanity because I care about these people, and then suddenly it's like, here he goes again, here's the fight. It's fighting talk. I can't stand that. If you're going to say that someone's insane, right, you should make a case for it. You should say, I think he's insane and here's why. Would you like me to give I could sit here for about 2 hours talking about why I think Joe Biden's insane. I could probably do the same for Barack Obama. Could probably do the same for Tony Blair. And it'd be that they'd be deluded. And here's what they did that was foolhardy. You'd have to make the case. And this guy just with the throwaway line says that Melanie Phillips is insane. And it's like, well, the thing is, it's like that crowd that he were talking to were all like Palestine supporters. Yeah? They haven't read Melanie Phillips' work. They've not heard her speak. They've not read her articles. I actually don't think she's such a bad commentator where it comes to one side of the argument. And she's nowhere near insane. She's actually quite thoughtful and has a different life experience and can speak. She can basically make the case that it's the difficult and violent Palestinians and Hamas that are perpetuating the conflict. And like, until those people are gone, there's no hope for peace, and she'd be right. But it's like, to say that she's insane, you're never gonna ever come to an impasse. You basically you've set yourself in a position on a side that would lead to a perpetual war, because you're not even listening. You're not interested. You're not even interested in what someone who's made a great deal of effort would have to say, because it's a confounding situation as to where if your brain only works in yes and no and good guys and bad guys, you'll never be able to understand the complexity and the horror of the situation in Gaza. It's like, one day someone has to turn it off. Now, they've managed to perpetuate this conflict now for all my life. So it's been seen as like, my generation inherited that war. And very few people there's people around who are involved in this struggle, who've been involved in this struggle for their whole lives, and they're 90 years old. They could have said to have been around to play a part in it. Well, again, partisans on all sides. And it's like, well, those with the dog in the fight, their experience has shaped their reality. And it's like, might there be a time come along where everyone in the world is someone who's actually inherited the struggle? You look at those statistics they'll throw out of the number of children who've died in Gaza, And there was that same guy today was saying normally in a war the death count amongst children is like 8%, but in Gaza it's up in the 40s. And he's saying this means that the Israelis are targeting children, and it's like, well, no, it doesn't. It means that the demographic of the population of Palestine are a lot of children. And you could say that is a weird old thing. It's like Generation Z, you know, the Generation Z, the people now who are now like between the age of 18 and 25, they are the most populous, the largest demographic of like voters or human beings. There's more people in that age group than any other. So, of course, there's an inordinate number of children killed in Gaza. Of course there is. They're Generation Z, they are Zoomers. Everywhere in the world you look at, if you were to start dropping nuclear weapons, you'd kill an inordinate number of children these days because population's growing. So to throw that statistic out is to say is that they'll say the Israeli are targeting children because look at 40% of the casualties are children. It's like they've got a lot of children. They've got the largest generation ever of Palestinians are like under 15. How could they not be when that trend is consistent all over the world? Very few places that are in sort of a slowdown in population. Certain places in the West, China, that one-child policy of a few years ago, which was some kind of a non-thinking measure of how to reduce population, that's caused basically a sort of unnatural cultural disasters befallen the Chinese as to where there's not enough women to go around. They can't. They're in a situation where they're going to have an aging population and then suddenly a collapsing population in a few years' time, and that's because of ridiculous policies as to where someone thinks they're clever doing this and they've not really thought about the repercussions. They've not thought about the social implications as to where sons are seen as a potential investment, aren't they? In a place like China, you say, well, he's an earner. It's like they're in some ways traditional. Women do the domestic work, which there's no shame in, and men go out and do the heavy lifting. And everyone's like, oh, well, aren't heavy lifters better for us? They'll bring more money home, better for everyone else, better for everyone. So suddenly you get it where you get a generation of people who've been aborting female children. It says, well, when we give her up to be married, we'll have to pay for the wedding. We might have to pay a dowry. And that mixes in with government policy, and suddenly you've got this one-child situation, and you've got an inordinate number of male children, because at the same time, people are allowed to choose. If you're only allowed to have one child, well, you'd have a boy, wouldn't you? Because the boy can go out and do the heavy lifting, he can do the dangerous work, he can earn the big money. So why wouldn't you? If that's the situation that's been put to you, well, it takes, it doesn't take so many people to decide they're better off having a son and not a daughter for there to be a mismatch. If we're going to perpetuate the species, if we're going to keep going, we're going to need a lot of men and a lot of women. Kids need fathers more than they'd like to admit. Well-known fact these days that if you don't raise your kids, someone else will raise them for you, and it might end up being a YouTuber, it might end up being Andrew Tate, it might well be Jordan Peterson. Someone's going to do it. Could be a watch Guardians of the Galaxy, where that fatherless child. He had it's a joke, isn't it? But it's like a sad but true joke. It's a good joke because there's truth to it. where he had a picture of David Hasselhoff in a wallet and used to pretend that that was his dad. Because he was a big fan of Knight Rider, looked up to him. Strange how boys latch on to certain types of men, and it's often the characters they play in television shows, which is probably a subject for another video. Although I've talked about that one before, about role models in fiction. I have my own ideas about it. But it's like, that's how it works. So it's like, this inordinate number of children that have died in this conflict in Gaza, that's not about the Israelis targeting children, that's about Israelis dropping bombs and having a large segment of the population be children. War is terrible. War is despicable. War is, in the end, they can try and be as, it's like, it's not easy to be accurate dropping a, 500-pound bomb. You can do your best to hit your target, but that thing that goes on around it called collateral damage, it's unavoidable. Terrible. And then you get it as to where Gaza is a highly populated and dense area, much like any city. It's not actually out of the ordinary. If suddenly London was at war with the rest of the country, and people started to lob mortars and shells into London, you'd get the same kind of effect when those bombs started raining down in highly populated zones. Blocks of flats hit. You'd get the same results. It's a despicable, shitty mess. It is a despicable, shitty mess. But there's a level to it where I can't look past it. I can't see past that. That October the 7th is one of the worst atrocities in the history of mankind. That's unconscionable and unseemly and barbaric. And as provocations go, I like geopolitics. I like to analyse the big picture a lot. I'm quite good at it. If you'd have asked me 2 years ago how to start World War III, I'd have said, well, you can kill a couple of thousand Jews. Because, you see, that's been like a shit test. A sympathy shit test. Whose side are you on? Well, ostensibly, I support the Palestinians and their right to have their own state and be free of oppression and embargo. And fine. Now how do you stand with that? When those who are charged ostensibly with their security have put them at incredible risk. Because Israel, they reach for the old book. Reaching for the old book, they find the God of Abraham. And the old God be like, oh, well, seems as they didn't do anything to rid themselves of those. God's judgment is terrible. It's like, there's this objection you hear before, and I heard Tommy Sotomayor say it once, and then other people started saying it. Tommy Sotomayor said it first, and then Kanye West started saying it. It's funny how it works. There's a few prophets in the world, some of them are rather unlikely, and Tommy Sotomayor is an unlikely prophet, and he said slavery is a choice, and they just slated him. See, but people were asking for reparations for slavery. He's like, no, slavery is a choice, you don't deserve any reparation. It's a choice. It's like, there are those who threw themselves overboard on those slave ships and they drowned to death. They chose freedom over slavery. If you can choose to die, you had a choice. And people were just outraged. I'm like, no, he's right. It's like, God is unforgiving in some regards. It's like God's kind of blind and only cares about the truth of the matter and doesn't count death as being a disadvantage, if you like. The old gods, you have to understand the old gods' ways. It's like the thing with Jesus. I look at Jesus as this. Jesus is like, right, deal with me, and I'll be the go-between between me and between you and God. Like, why? It's like, well, you can negotiate with me. You won't be able to negotiate with God. His judgments are harsh and beyond your understanding, beyond your feelings, beyond your conscience, and it be God's judgment be brutal and final, and could be seen as just ruthless, violent. It's like, tell me that's wrong when you live in a world like we live in, where there's misery and death, people doing things onto each other that are despicable, robbing their lives, stealing their futures, destroying their minds, stealing their souls. It goes on a lot. It's going on everywhere. Somewhere right now, someone's being raped. Somewhere right now, someone's taking pleasure in the misery of another. You're like, don't tell me that God isn't a punisher. And we visit misery on each other, don't we? God has a way of making people pay. And it's like the innocents get in the way of it. And it's like it's man's place, one under God, to understand God and be like, you don't want to mess with him. So I see Jesus as that. It's like, you can negotiate with me. It's like, in some ways, Jesus is much like Apollo. I like Apollo. Apollo's like my guy. Also, John the Baptist is my guy as well. But Apollo's my guy. And it's like, Apollo was the son of Zeus. Going way at what Zeus was like. Zeus was kind of beneficial in some regards, but in other regards, a madman who did whatever he wanted to and would cast down judgments, see the innocent die. That's what God's like Zeus, who was Apollo, his son, who was forged by a relationship with this dysfunctional father, this crazy old man. And it'd be, what did Apollo do? Well, as the myths go, he invented trial by jury. Because he'd witnessed the actions of his father, he'd found a better way of doing it. Let's get to the truth. I know the difference between right and wrong. I'll be the judge. And you can test my logic. You can test my reasoning. But my father, Zeus, don't try and reason with him. He'll be it's like you provoke the Israelis. They go, well, they become very agitated, very emotional, very angry. Suddenly the blood's up and they reach for the old God. And what does the old God do? Sodom and Gomorrah. Back when October the 7th happened, I spoke of this. Like, they will reach for the old boss. They will reach for the old God. They will reach for the real God. And the real God will rain down fire and brimstone and say, well, if these people refuse to fight and die against this tyranny of Hamas, they deserve it. God's judgment is harsh. Harsh. It's like they'll reach for that and it'll give them, in othering the Palestinians, will give them in essence, the green light to exterminate them all. And it'd be right. It's like, yeah, well, that's what God's like. It's like, it's why you should fear God. Because God's capable of genocide. God's capable of horror, punishment. But God's also capable of mercy and forgiveness if one repents. The real failure is that Craig Murray guy saying, well, she's insane. That's the failure. She's insane. Well, she isn't. You just can't see the world from her point of view. So therefore, she doesn't think like you. She's insane. And I answer it with one of my favourite sayings, which everyone's a dog to a dog. It's one of my... I love dog jokes. I make lots of dog jokes. I spend quite a bit of time up Psych, which is like... I wasn't born up Psych, that's where I grew up. I was born right where I am. I was actually conceived about 200 metres away from where I'm sat. I'm from Rewley Moor. I was born on Rewley Moor Road. Just right next to the River Spod. The Spodden. This is where I'm from. I'm like feet away from where I came into the world. But Psych is where I was raised. And Psych's it's a nice place. If you were to see it, you would say, this is a nice place, this is a nice area. It's semi-rural. Nice places to walk a dog. So I find myself walking dogs. I don't have a dog anymore. It's a shame. I miss Mile. He was my best friend. Milo, my Chihuahua. I miss him, but the thing is, I know he's happy. He's gone back to living with his sister. His sister's got a lot of dogs. Milo likes the company of dogs as much as he likes the company of humans, because everyone's a dog to a dog. I had to have a dog to understand that everyone's a dog to a dog. Dog psychology. Dog psychology is like an old comedy act of mine. It's like an old skit as to where, just go on the internet. Anything you can think of to sell to a human to give to a dog as a token of affection or welfare, it's already been thought of. So I used to have this joke going about dog TV. It's like you could trick humans into paying a subscription for programming for dogs, right? I thought I was brilliant and had invented something. It's like, hey, I'm onto something here. You could get all these fucking dog walkers to pay $10 a month, and they could put dog TV on and leave for the dogs to watch it, because dogs can actually see television, can't they? They couldn't see the old tube. It just looked like just a grey box to them. But modern televisions, they can see. So TFT television and a dog, wow. It's like the subconscious human mind cannot tell the difference between colour television and real life. The subconscious, right? Dog, what chance has it got? So have you noticed how you've got a big TV and your dogs go crazy when a horse is on screen? It's like, what kind of damage are you doing to your dog? But you say dog don't give a shit. Dog will actually forget rather quickly that it's been mildly traumatized. It'll just be distracted and move on to the next thing. It's like, to teach a dog a trick, you have to incentivize it. And I don't see the TFT big screen TV chucking out dog treats. Do you? I don't see that horse on the big screen TV giving a dog a bit of a kick to make sure it doesn't get so close next time. Do you? So the dog forgets. But I came up with this joke of this dog TV, and then it came to me to say, we should Google this and see if it's real. And sure enough, someone had already invented dog TV. You can have this on while you go out and your dog will have company. People leaving radios on for dogs, leaving televisions on for dogs. Oh, it's for the dog, so the dog doesn't get lonely. It's like, how do you know a dog would get lonely? In my experience, when there's no stimuli, a dog just goes to sleep. A dog can sleep all the time if there's no stimuli, if there's nothing for it to look at, if there's nothing for it to react to, it just goes to sleep. But people think their dogs have secret lives and think like they do. One of my favourite ones is I've got a big black coat. It's a good coat. I got a big black coat, big black sort of trench coats, warm, big thing. And I'll be out walking dogs with it, and I'll go and make friends with dogs. I like making friends with dogs. It's a reflection on, basically it's a reflection on how good they've been trained to be sociable. And it's like you can make a dog more sociable by being sociable with the dog. So I make friends with dogs. And when I make friends with a black dog, I'll say to the owner, say, well, you know why he likes me? Well, I've got a black coat on. He thinks I'm one of his mates. He thinks I'm his kind. And it always raises a smile, always raises a laugh, because the truth is everyone's a dog to a dog. And you'll never get past that. Really, dogs can have their own pets. Dogs don't have friends, they have pets. Like you have a pet dog, the dog will have a pet dog. A dog would see its owner as just a better dog, the boss dog. You're not a human, you're just a boss dog. Everyone's a dog to a dog. When I heard that Craig Murray guy say that Melanie Phillips is insane, that's what I thought. Well, everyone's a dog to a dog. That's what I thought. Well, she doesn't see the world like you, so therefore she's not a dog. She's a bad dog. And that kind of thinking perpetuates this, what appears to be an eternal struggle. And it's you're not as smart as you think you are when you can other someone. If you can look past the individual and then target the group, you're a fool. You're a fool, and there's no way past it. And you will find yourself embroiled in struggles between us and them when there's only you. There is no us. Fundamentally, we're all alone. People who are married, people who've got kids. In your mind, you're alone. In your dreams, you're alone. When you visit the toilet, you're on your own. When you die alone. Even if you're surrounded by all your relatives and friends, you still die alone. It's like, I don't understand why people don't see this. I see it. I don't ever get lonely. You say, well, you're single, Johnny. I don't ever get lonely. Why? Well, I'm never on my own, am I? There's me and there's God. Looks after me. There's always more to learn. I never get lonely. Never. Why? Well, I'm not at war with God. I'm not at war with myself. That othering, she's insane. I'm like, in this room there's plenty to admire. There's a lot of love in this room. But there's a hell of a lot of hate as well. And it's not focused, it's just there. It's just blah. And it's like, if we're ever going to find solutions to problems like that, where a group of cutthroats can shit test the world and say, whose side are you on? And people will fall into camps. Oh, I'm pro-Israel. Oh, I'm pro-Hamas. There's no hope for us because we're not learning. We've not learned. The fear of God has made way for the in essence, I don't think the devil's the devil, you see. I think there's a thing, you know, you can go and look up on the internet. There's a Google search you can do about the devil, and it comes back with a literal answer, and it's like fictional character out of the movie The Omen. Seriously. I think God and the devil are the same. I think the devil is God, who's the God who you've gone to war with, and's gone, oh, so you're going to be that disrespectful, are you? Well, how about this? I'm going to use the world as a stage against you, and I'm going to use the world to smash you in the face for your self-delusion and wickedness as often as I get chance to. And just the truth of reality be something that keeps smashing you in the face and smashing you in the face. And until you see what's real, it's going to keep smashing you in the face, and it's going to keep making you feel helpless, and it's going to keep making you feel lonely, and it's going to keep making you feel... And it's like God could be said to be the greatest designer of individual prison cells that people carry around with them. It's like hate, get you nowhere. I just had a back and forth on Facebook with someone, another one I used to go to school with. It's weird, you know. We're like the golden generation. People I went to school with, we were the same age as David Beckham and Paul Scholes and Gary Neville. The golden generation. And he said something derogatory about Graham Souness, the footballer, who's not particularly liked footballer. He's a bit divisive, let's say. And they were having a laugh about how bitter he was that Liverpool got beaten. And I'm like, I listened to an interview recently with Graham Souness, and I've actually come to like him. I quite admire him as, in essence, someone who took it so seriously. He fought it. He fought, and he sacrificed his health and his body, and got stuck in and dished it out and took a few back. And he tells a tale of his first ever game at Elland Road against Leeds in his debut season for Middlesbrough when he was in his teens. And he says Johnny Giles and Billy Bremner, in essence, sandwiched him. They both hit him at the same time. Whack. So he got basically, when that happens to you, you get trapped and you end up twisted and you get hurt because two guys have tackled you at once. Like, two guys tackle you at once, you end up getting stretchered off. And this is what happened to Graham Souness. Johnny Giles, Billy Bremner, fine footballers, but thugs on a football field, violent players. People who will take you out of the game if they think you're a soft touch. Well, they decided he was a soft touch and they took him out of the game. Back in the days when you only had one substitute, took him out of the game. And Souness was saying, it was in that moment that I learned you're either a bully or you might as well not bother playing. If they can do that to you and they're not afraid of you, you're not going to be at the top of this game for very long. So it's like those two people in their act of sort of barbarity taught him an incredible lesson that he carried for the rest of his football life. You can either be, you know, the boot or the arse that's getting kicked, and he decided he was going to be the boot. And it's a chap who was, and he's a big Celtic fan, so he always makes it about, again, this is the same struggle, it's this all sectarian, it's a football thing as well. Well, it's like Rangers, dickhead Rangers, all Rangers are dickheads like that. And I'm like, if you had anything about you, you can hate that guy but also admire him, as to say, he's worth beating. He's a worthy enemy. It's like you take him for granted, he'd destroy you on a football field. It's like there are elements in that conflict as to where the Israelis can be seen as being a worthy opponent and admirable, and those who hate them, they have to be able to learn to respect them. There's a malfunction in my mind that goes something like, if you believe that the Israelis are butchers, murderers, ruthless, cunning, dangerous, why provoke them? And the answer is to get exactly the reaction that's happened. Now it's like the provocation, knowing that that would be the outcome, that is a monstrous sin. It's like that's compounded the act of we'll fight to the last one of our civilians. We'll fight to the last drop of our own people's blood, who we're duty bound to protect. We'll fight you to the last drop of our own people's blood. That's unforgivable. I can't see past it. It's made what was a complicated, horrendous standoff into like murderous hot war. And the failure of the ostensible, because it could be said that these guys who've always been pro-Palestinian, they've been fighting the good fight as far as they're concerned, and then it comes to it where those who they fight for in their own internal dynamic have actually done something absolutely wicked. They can't not support them. It would mean that the struggle that they've been fighting for their entire lives had somehow been made invalid, when it's not. You've just lost the moral imperative. And it's like those who don't understand things like Sun Tzu just knew God's wisdom. He just knew God's nature. It's part of it. That's just why a Chinese tome on military excellence is basically, you can apply it to any situation in the world. And it's because we're all under the same God. That's why it works. It's like, you've lost the moral imperative. Now's the time to stop and think and try to even detach yourself from this side or collective you found yourself, this hive mind collective, because it's the hive mind collectives that come up with the plans that get people killed. At the same time, it's like the war in the Ukraine, I think that's a terrible atrocity, and the atrocity has been committed by the Ukrainians, who've picked a war they can never win, and have sacrificed the lives of a generation of young men and seen them killed in the hundreds of thousands. And there are those out in the world who know nothing of themselves, or can't see past their own nose, who would, they're not in the fight, but they would say, we'd never surrender to Russia, we'd never surrender. It's like, oh, you seem quite willing for your own ends, to sate your own needs, to believe yourself to be one of the good people. You're willing to hold a position and, in essence, fight a war on the internet 1,000 miles away from where you live till the last drop of Ukrainian blood. And what does that make you? Wicked. Wicked evil. And it'd be a strange one with Mr. Galloway, because he will live and die by the Palestinian cause, but I agree with him wholeheartedly on the situation in Ukraine. He's always called it correctly. I've been away and done my homework over a long period of years. I've followed Ukraine since I read this in-depth article in The Guardian, when it used to be a newspaper, when it used to actually be on the side of peace. Um, reading about the elections in Ukraine as far back as 2008, 2009, as to where they were making the case rather plain as to say this isn't really a democracy, you know. They made the Guardian were able to make the case to me to say that nothing ever changed in Ukraine. It's like just the old communist bosses. Oh, well, okay, we're having an election. We're still going to win. Nothing ever changed. The old communists, rich as they made themselves, stayed in power. Their democracy was an absolute sham. And it was actually Russian influence that made it more like a democracy. A little bit freer than it were. And then there's a coup 2014, and it reverts back to its old state as to where the bosses who've always been in charge are back in charge. See completely eye to eye with George on Ukraine, but on Israel, Palestine, I'm like I've not actually had this conversation with George Galloway, but I've spoken. I've only spoken to him the once in person. But I'd be there making the case as to say, you as being one of the most influential voices on this subject might just for a moment have considered calling for Hamas's surrender and the release of hostages on a path to peace, as to say, look, this is an atrocity. Things have gotten out of hand and things are going to get worse. Now's the time. But it's like the mob might see that as a betrayal, and so it's beyond, it's out of the question. But it's like I see it that way, and it's like, by my reckoning, I care more about the Palestinians than those who are ostensibly out in the wider world fighting for them, because I'd like to see them alive. I'd like to see them live to even fight another day, or else, live to have children, live to learn, live to swim, jump, run, and not be dead. You see, there's certain realities in this world that certain things that will never be undone, can't be undone. The people on the right, they bemoan the number of immigrants in this country, and I'd be like, well, they're not going anywhere. You might as well find common ground with them. They're human beings. They have the same needs as me or you. They all have to go out and earn. Find common ground, because they're not going anywhere. And no one's for exterminating them. But if you mouth off like that, you might be the one for the chop, because you're flying in the face of reality. God has a way of weeding people out who won't face reality. And maybe it's your end that will happen, and not, a mass cult or something like that, or a mass deportation. Send them all back. No. If you think like that, you're just not thinking. You're black and white thinking from emotion, and it's not going to do you any good. You have to accept what the world is and the situation that you're left with. You might not like it, but that doesn't matter. No one gives a fuck. Nothing's going to change. So it's like, make peace with it, or it's going to kill you. One way or another. Whether your health gets you, or whether, someone decides one day they don't like the way you talk and decides to permanently adjust your attitude. There's realities to it. And another reality is that Israel are not going to go away, ever. They're established. They're not going away. And then another reality is that the Palestinians are established and they're never going away either. So it's like we either face reality or God destroy us. And to me, it's that's the choice is as simple as that. God destroy us when reality smashes us in the face. And sometimes reality is a bomb falling from the sky that'll blow you to 1,000 pieces. Reality can be as cruel as an artillery shell that turns you and your mate into a load of smithereens. We're seeing World War I level horror in Ukraine. Why? Because drones have made artillery old, 100-year-old and more technology into the ultimate weapon. So we're seeing carnage on a scale that hasn't been seen in 100 years. And this needs to stop. But hey, the activists out in the world with the little flags, they're more than willing to be on the side of what they ostensibly, consider themselves in the right. They're willing to fight to the last drop of Palestinian blood, and they're willing to fight to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. And it'd be, well, until humans get between, end this conflict with God, it's going to keep going. It's going to get worse. And the world is as far from wisdom now as it's ever been in my lifetime. And that's the only time I can really pass comment on. The world is as far from wisdom now as it's ever been. So it in some regards takes heroes to go against the mob. Heroes to go against the mob, because that's what it takes. And those heroes might die, but when they come for me, know that I speak well of you in heaven. You've got to be brave, you've got to hit it head on, and you've got to be able to see both sides. Otherwise it's all over now. It's all over already. We are not past the point of no return, because there are still people thinking, speaking, breathing, walking, and people still turn up for work, don't they? So as long as there's life, there's hope. So the preservation of life is what's in order, and it be a question be, what do we have to do? What sacrifices do we have to make? And it's mostly to do with pride, letting go of a bit of hate, compromising. It's like those who aren't willing to compromise are already dead. They just don't know it yet. Without it, things will get worse. It wouldn't surprise me if we saw a nuclear war. Say 20 years ago, I'd have been like, you're kidding me. No one's got the political will, things like that. And nuclear weapons be seen as a waste of money, a joke, another problem we've inherited that's never going away, because you can't uninvent the ultimate weapon. You can't say, oh well, we'll lay down our arms if you lay down yours. No one's ever going to do it, are they? It's just a joke. I've seen the old arguments for unilateral nuclear disarmament reappear recently, and I'm like, do you realise how foolish and foolhardy that is, as to where we might as well be talking about the names of our pets? We might as well be having a debate about ferrets as talk about unilateral nuclear disarmament. That ship has sailed. gone. The struggles of the campaign for nuclear disarmament are something that, again, Mr. Galloway was a big part of. It's gone. Maybe you should have fought harder back then, because it was politicians who started things like the British nuclear weapons programme, and it was done by the Labour Party. How about that? The good guys, the ostensible good guys, the Labour Party, the Labour government. It was them who had this country develop the nuclear bomb, and in the end they failed in some regards, and we went to partnership with the Americans. They in some regards sold us the technology. That we became a customer, a client state of theirs, customer, and we can't even use our nuclear deterrent without the permission of the United States of America. Over that, we pay for something that we don't control or are not allowed to use. But hey, France have got nuclear weapons and they're beholden to nobody. Nobody. Do we ever speak of the French being a nuclear power with likely the ability to trigger a nuclear war, or if they wish to completely decimate a nation, a continent even, with the delivery systems to do so? Do we ever speak of the French as a nuclear power? Dangerous, potentially. No, we don't. Although the Black Lives Matter guys, right? They talk about slavery, but they never mention the Portuguese and the Spanish, who were bigger sinners than the British ever were, bigger sinners than the Americans ever were. But they don't talk about them. And it's like, well, why? Oh, well, they're not going to pay, are they? They can't be easily manipulated by their history. When was the last time you heard nasty things said about the Spanish and the Portuguese? When was the last time you heard about like that 100-year war they had? Where the Catholics were very much on the side of slavery, and the Protestants were very much against it. Ain't that a thing?